everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We're going to shift gears a little bit right now, and I heard the question during the break. Someone talked about, well, what do we do next? Right? We're innovating. We've got all these great technologies that we heard over the past few days, and what do we do next, and how do we sort of transform and create sort of a transformation in the industry? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to just raise the elephant in the room, which is none of this stuff really matters in what we've been talking about for the past 4 days unless we understand the context in which all of the technologies converge, right? How do they all intersect, and how do we essentially introduce this into the environment and the ecosystem that ultimately makes sense for all of us? And so I want to share this little video that sort of takes us down memory lane, and some of you may remember this from back in the day.
When I grow up, I want to file all day.
I want to claw my way up to middle management.
Be replaced on a whim.
I want to have a brown nose.
I want to be a yes man.
Yes woman.
Yes, sir. Coming, sir.
Anything for a raise, sir.
When I grow up,
I want to be underappreciated.
be paid less for doing the same job. I want sunshine blowing up my dress.
So I love that video. That brings back memories from the Monster.com days. But, I mean, how many people in this room, we all have ambition. We're all here for a reason, right? How many people here, raise your hands, who wants to be average? Right? No one in this room wants to be average. Yet when we go back to our regular institutions, we all end up doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result from that. And so we need to be thinking quite differently in terms of how we're going to incorporate these things into the environments that we work in. And I've been really obsessed with trying to understand periods of transformations, things that we call paradigm shifts. Over the course of years, we put names to them, right? The agricultural era, the industrial era, of course, the information era and economy that we're in right now. And there are certain patterns that really unfold during these sort of periods of transformation. Of course, it's where a significant crisis across all of our industries essentially converges with a trigger element. In our case, it's the technologies developed and the exponential technologies developed that are now pushing us into sort of a new transformational era. And so during this process of transformation, of course, there's an unbundling process, and we're all kind of frustrated and living it right now, where everything gets dismantled. And it's up to us to figure out how do we reassemble the pieces that ultimately make sense in the environments and the experiences that we're trying to deliver for the customers going forward. I'm not going to talk specifically about the patterns of paradigm shifts and transformation. I think there's a lot of research and studies being done on that. But I do want to dive into the heads of people who have essentially created new techniques and patterns and principles that allow us to sort of leapfrog and transform and create new reimagined experiences across different industries. If we look back in the history of time, at the invention of a number of products, you look at the cotton gin, you look at the light bulb, the automobile, the telephone, there's a common element here is that the inventor of these products is actually not the person who ultimately gets credit for the invention. The people who ultimately get credit for the invention are the people who understand how that invention fits within the marketplace. How do you commercialize it? How do you market it? How do you understand the experiences in which that technology or that innovation actually makes sense? So we tend to go back and we think that sort of innovation is this linear process, and if you just do a Google search on innovation, comes up, hundreds of thousands of frameworks and models come up, and we tend to sort of abide by these sort of linear processes of thinking. But what's interesting is that if you dig into the individuals who essentially help transform different industries, whether it be in healthcare or other industries, they're actually doing things quite differently. They're doing things rather unusually. And so that's kind of what I want to share with you today in terms of what are some of the things that I'm uncovering in terms of my research. And I have a number of principles that are sort of worthy of putting in a book, but I'm going to share 5 of them with you here today. But to really illustrate how we go back and ultimately innovate, some of you may have seen this video. I'm just going to play about 30, 40 seconds of it. And as I play this, I want you to sort of pay attention to the individual in the middle and the individual on the left. Now watch the guy on the right. I love that. I love that reaction. So I share this video with you because it's rather unexpected. And when we go back, we typically look at the guy in the middle. We say, this is the way we've done things. How do we do it better? How do we do it faster? How do we do it cheaper? And what we actually do, if we sort of set ourselves up to the future and say, this is our objective. In this case, the objective is to get as many points as possible. It doesn't matter what form or shape you take it in. And the guy on the left essentially created an entirely new way of achieving that goal and that objective. And so I want to put you in that mindset in terms of some of the principles that I'm going to share with you when you go back in ways to think differently in terms of how to incorporate these technologies in your environment. So I like to think that in healthcare, we actually have a burrito problem. And I'd imagine probably everyone in this room has eaten a burrito, if you haven't, use your imagination. But here's a guide, and it's one of my favorite blog posts of all time, and you can go search for it. Here's an individual who had a horrible burrito experience, and he calls it burrito abomination. And he felt so compelled and pissed off about his experience that he wrote a blog post to the person who made his burrito. And I'm just going to read a clip of it because I think this illustrates our issue in healthcare. Burritos are eaten from one end to the other. So that means when you assemble a burrito with motherfucking zones of ingredients, going that direction, you create a disgusting experience for the burrito's end user. When you make a burrito, you should put the ingredients in layers lengthwise. That way, every bite has at least a fucking chance of getting at least 2 types of ingredients. And there's little chance of becoming almost hopelessly trapped in a goddamn cilantro cavern. This is healthcare. Right? I'm convinced that this guy's a product guy, just by the way he wrote it. But we have all of the ingredients. You just heard a lot of the ingredients just over the past few days here at Exponential Medicine. And it's up to us to reconfigure these ingredients in a recipe that makes it consumable for the end user, for the individuals who are going to be utilizing our technologies. We have a burrito problem in healthcare. So I like to sort of simplify things, and the way transformations occur over these paradigm shifts is very simply in 3 sort of ways. There's a trigger element. In our case, it's the exponential technologies that have been introduced to us a few decades ago that we're now building off of, and this really sets the foundation for the infrastructure in terms of what we need to build off of. Of course, this is the internet, the broadband, the speeds, capacitor, or the storage capacity. And then on top of that infrastructure, we end up building incremental innovations. And I'd argue that we're sort of in that period now, in the thick of that period. And oftentimes, it's a very messy period and a chaotic period because it's a series of experimentations. And we learn from these experimentations. But ultimately, to get over the hump of incremental innovation, we need to think about transformation. And transformation is about experience. It's about reassembling those pieces that I talked about, all of those ingredients in ways that ultimately make consumable sense for the end user. We clearly see it happening in many other industries. I'd imagine that no one in this room consumes music the way we did 5-10 years ago. I remember someone on stage saying they don't even have a CD player anymore. So what is that reimagined experience in healthcare? And I'm going to share with you 5 things that I've sort of plucked out in terms of my research and my discussions in sort of exploring the space. The first one is applying intersection thinking, and this is something that I spend a lot of my time doing. I keep one foot inside of healthcare, and I purposely keep one foot in practically every other industry to see what we can learn from each other. Anyone know what this number represents? Any guesses? This is the number of permutations and computations in a Rubik's Cube. And I like to use the Rubik's Cube as a metaphor in terms of how we sort of fit all together. Each one of you people in this room is a piece of that cube. And it's up to us to sort of have the conversations and assemble it ways that makes consumable sense. So let me just share some examples here. Some things are outside of healthcare, which oftentimes is where I go for some inspiration. Some of you may know about Harvard's new initiative in education called HBX Live. It's sort of reimagining a new learning experience. And you would think that as an educational institution, your typical place to go for inspiration is to see what your competitors are doing or see what's happening in the digital world of education. But in fact, what they did is they said, listen, let's reimagine what the experience should be. And where they went to get their inspiration was Las Vegas. And they went to the sport betting track. And if you've ever been to a sport betting track in Vegas, you're surrounded by all of these different monitors, and you're essentially engaging with those technologies in real time. And so they basically took that example and they reimagined a learning experience. You see a picture here of a professor, and it's actually live now, and they've introduced it to the world, and he's surrounded by television screens and is interacting with everyone around the world as he's teaching and interacting with them. Disney, another great example. We tend to think of Disney as an entertainment company with cruise ships and theme parks and movies, but Disney sees themselves as being in the business of creating wowable, memorable experiences. And they see that application across a number of other industries, and they've created the Institute to essentially help organizations in healthcare and multiple other industries to create those same types of experiences. The most obvious example, of course, in healthcare, which initially when these started to come out, everyone was skeptical about them, but the mashup between retail stores and healthcare clinics creating the spawn of a whole breed of retail centers. Apple, always a great example to bring into some of these case studies. When they introduced their concept of the retail store, everyone thought they were crazy. This is at a time when Gateway and Dell, they were all shutting their doors. And when Apple responded to the analysts, they said, "You're comparing us to the wrong sector. Don't compare us to Gateway and Dell, compare us to the Ritz-Carlton." In fact, they actually went to the Ritz-Carlton to determine how they were going to design the Apple retail store in creating their customer service and their concierge services with the Genius Bar. And of course, now that's all history. Apple's the most profitable per square foot retail operation in the world. So the point is we need to think how the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And this is clearly hypothetical. But we take all of the elements, and again, you see elements in here that are not necessarily in healthcare. And we see, you can imagine an experience where you utilize a telehealth service like a pager, plugs into a Minute Clinic. They tell you that they need to deliver some items to you. They dispatch an Uber over to your home. You set up your next appointment via ZocDoc. You're using tools like Breathometer from a wearable standpoint to track your information. So you can start to see the convergence of not only the technologies within healthcare, but how it actually fits within the context of how we live our lives. Uber, always a great example to sort of share in terms of experience. None of the technology in Uber is actually new. They just reassemble the existing pieces of technologies to reimagine an experience. And it's essentially transformed the way we actually get from point A to point B. Second point is design for the system. So what this means essentially, like I mentioned before, Edison did not invent the light bulb. But what he did do is he understood the context in which the light bulb would be useful in the ecosystem. Right? And then he essentially gets credit for inventing the light bulb because he understood how we experience our interactions with it. Lego, a successful toy company, was on the verge of bankruptcy at one point because nobody knew what to do with all these little blocks. It was fun to play with, but there was no real system behind it. And they realized that once they sort of put in their customers' eyes, it's the sense of, hey, I can build a Star Wars ship, I can build a fire truck, I can build a mini city. All of a sudden, they had a resurgence in their company. And now they're doing multiple other things in media and entertainment as well. Tesla, the more modern example, Tesla's not a car company, it's a battery company. And when Elon opened up his intellectual property, it wasn't because he was being altruistic, it's because he understood that the context of his battery, he needed to build the infrastructure behind it. And so he was designing, and the way he actually modeled his organization's business model to think about the entire ecosystem in which his company and his product was actually going to fit in. Thirdly, explore the interstitium, creating connected experiences. There's a famous quote that Gladwell always talks about in some of his talks. He says, to a worm in horseradish, the world is horseradish. And we tend to be, we're kind of all health geeks in this room, and we tend to only think in the world that we're sort of innovating within. And what we need to understand, and we've heard it from Alex Drain, and we've heard it from Dean Ornish, we need to understand how we fit into this equation of life, right? When I go home, I'm not thinking about healthcare innovations or exponential technologies. I'm taking care of my kids, we got to put dinner on the table, we've got financial stuff to talk about. So those who understand how we fit in the context of life is how we're going to transform experiences. And this is going to take a little bit of a challenge because we're always taught to build products to solve problems, right? Classic example of this is electronic health records, right? There's some technologists back in the early 90s who probably went and did a forum with about a dozen or so doctors and said, listen, if I could organize and archive all of your patient records and allow you to access and retrieve it at the click of a button, would that be useful to you? And resoundingly, every physician said, absolutely, I would love it. And then what happened? They go back, they raise $10 million, they come back 2 years later, they say, here it is. And not a single physician adopted it for a number of years. And partly because they were not taking and accounting for the experiences of the individuals. And we're hearing that sort of over and over again as we build out exponential technologies. What is the context that it fits in the lives of individuals? Visual example of it, obviously the sidewalk helps you get from point A to point B, but people are using it in a different pathway, so we need to observe and understand how they actually want to engage with it. Fourthly, design for simplicity. I know this sort of seems sort of obvious, but it's harder in practice than it is to actually say. A lot of the stuff that we're developing is very complex, hard to understand. This is actually the famous Picasso bull painting. It's actually a tool that Apple uses inside of their training program for all of their staff, not just their designers. And the point is if I were to basically tell you, if I were to have each one of you draw the bull on the bottom left-hand side, we'd probably have enough variations of that bull as there are people in this room. But if I were to tell you to draw the one in the middle right, we'd probably see a lot of consistency. And so the reason why Apple gets so successful, no matter how complex their technology is behind the system, they find ways to make the behaviors extremely simple. And there's a lot of great research done in this space, of course, BJ Fogg, Nir Eyal from the product standpoint, and a number of other places, but finding ways to automate mini habits and sort of mundane behaviors is critical to creating transformational experiences. The last one I'm going to leave you with is more of an inspirational one, and this is from a quote from my good friend MICK EBELING, who some of you might know, really inspiring individual who I got to meet on the road, and it's commit then figure it out. And MICK EBELING, for those of you who don't know him, he's actually, as a living, created YouTube videos for commercial enterprises. He's really good at that. And he actually picked up a piece of paper in the newspaper. He lives in Orange County in LA. And in the paper, he read a story about this kid named Daniel, who was interviewed. And Daniel was actually a little kid, he was a 14-year-old kid at the time, who lived in the sort of war zones of Sudan. And the communities in the rural towns, when they hear sort of the airplanes come through, they know to take cover, because that means there's a pending bomb that's about to be dropped. And so Daniel did just that. He takes cover, and he hid behind a tree, and he hugged the tree. And as he hugged the tree, the bomb dropped, and both of his arms got cut off. And in the newspaper, Mick reading it in LA, Daniel was interviewed, and he was quoted saying, "I wish I'd rather died than to have to live with no arms, because now I'm a burden on my family for the rest of my life." And so Mick was really struggled by this and really pained by this, and so he tracked down the doctor in Sudan. He said, "Why can't we do anything for Daniel?" And the doctor's like, "Well, at $15,000 a prosthetic, we can't possibly afford the amount required to serve all of the amputated patients in Sudan." So Mick basically says, "Well, if I could build it for you for under $100, would you buy it?" And the doctor's like, "Well, of course we would. We'll buy it in bulk." So he hangs up the phone. He's like, "Oh, shit, what do I do now?" So he committed and figured it out. So he has no background in healthcare, no engineering background, knows nothing about prosthetics or nothing about the industry, never even met Daniel. He's got a wife and 3 kids, found 5 experts from around the country. We flew him into his home, and basically in the course of 2 or 3 weeks, hacked together a solution. Then he flew out to Sudan, tracked down Daniel in sort of this remote, active war zone area, and he describes this sort of experience as, I don't know if folks have seen The Gods Must Be Crazy, where the Coke bottle drops in and the technology and everyone's just, I mean, they had never seen a smartphone, much less an iPad and a 3D printer. And he takes with him a 3D printer. He goes there, builds a prosthetic, and sees Daniel actually utilize his arms and smile and throw and eat for the first time in years. And he did it all for $100 for the prosthetic. He trains the local community in how to use a 3D printer and iPad. By the time he flies back, they'd already built 7 or 8 for other amputees as well. Very, very inspiring story. Commit then figure it out. He runs an organization called Not Impossible Labs. This is an interesting quote that actually just 2 days ago, Vivek had republished a post that Vivek Wadhwa, some of you may know, also affiliated with Singularity. And he published an article called Why We Should Believe the Dreamers, Not the Experts. And he says, experts are the greatest inhibitors of innovation, the ones who shouldn't be listened to. And then he sort of subquoted Peter Diamandis in it, saying an expert is someone who can tell you exactly how it can't be done. And this is kind of our challenge going forward. So I'm going to leave you with an inspirational video. It's actually the manifesto of the company that I created and started. And I hope it sort of leaves you with a sense of motivation and inspiration as we go forward.
The age of average is over. We believe the future belongs to those with grit, to those willing to break out of their shell and experience something different, something unusual. We believe the unusual inspires a sense of wonder and new perspectives, perspectives that help us venture into the unknown, explore the impossible, and make us continually ask, what if? We believe that within the unusual, we will find extraordinary thinking powered by curious people. People who possess the ability to see what others do not. People courageous enough to do what's right, regardless of the uncertainty ahead. They go against the grain. They create their own rules. They have disdain for the ordinary, and they are fearless in challenging the status quo. We believe in celebrating the unusual ideas that make us unique individuals. We believe in the force of these unusual people to change the world. We are unusual.
So with that, my time is up. Thank you very much, and thank you, Daniel, for having me here today.
Thanks.